The first thing I noticed wasn't the noise. It was the silence between vibrations. My phone kept lighting up on the kitchen counter, over and over, but nobody was leaving voicemails. Just messages stacking on top of each other. Payroll screenshots, red numbers. A balance that dipped below zero like gravity suddenly changed its mind. I stood there in my socks, coffee burning because I forgot to pull the pot away, staring at one line someone had circled in a shaky finger swipe. Net pay negative. Not late. Not pending. Negative. That's when my chest tightened. Not panic yet. Something colder. By 8:15. I had messages from 3 supervisors and 1 union rep. Nobody was yelling. That was worse. When people don't get paid, the shouting usually comes later. I knew exactly why this was happening. I'd known since Friday afternoon. 3 days earlier, the CEO leaned back in his chair and said, calm as weather, that they didn't need my timekeeping and payroll system anymore. He said it like he was clearing out old furniture. Then he added the real part. His son was taking over operations. Fresh perspective. Modern approach. I told them Monday was the cutoff. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I just said that after Monday morning. Payroll doesn't roll. Banks don't wait. Employees don't get paid. And unions don't stay quiet. They nodded, smiled, even like I was being dramatic. Now it was Monday. I scrolled again. Someone wrote that their rent was due today. Someone else asked if this was a test run. A warehouse lead sent a single line saying the guys were standing around and nobody knew what to tell them. My name is Maribel Knox. I am 48 years old. I didn't build that system to be clever. I built it so people could eat, so they could show up and trust that the hours they worked would turn into money where it mattered. The phone buzzed again. HR this time. Missed call. Then another. I set the mug down without drinking it. My hand was shaking. Just a little. Not fear. Not yet. It felt more like watching something fall that you already let go of. I grabbed my keys. Not because I knew what I was going to do, just because standing still wasn't an option anymore. I kept driving even though I knew where this memory would land. People at work used to say the system ran itself. That always made me laugh. Nothing runs itself. It just runs on someone you stop noticing. I built that payroll and timekeeping setup piece by piece. Nights, weekends. In between fixing other people's mistakes. Why is this approval step so slow, the COO asked once. Because if it skips, I said, someone gets shorted. He sighed. It's just numbers. Maribel. No, I said, it's groceries. That was the conversation. Over and over. Different people. Same tone. Every Monday, I'd be in early. Not because anyone told me to, because I didn't trust things not to break. They always break somewhere. A missed punch. A supervisor approving the wrong shift. A batch file hanging at the worst possible second. One time a manager joked, "You worry too much." I told him, "That's why you get paid on time." He stopped smiling. I knew whose overtime mattered. I knew which crews couldn't afford a delay. I knew when a negative balance wasn't a glitch but a cascade that would eat the whole run if it wasn't stopped right there. HR leaned on me constantly. Can you just push it through? No, I said, not clean yet. Finance complained. This process costs too much time. It costs less than fixing a strike? I said, nobody argued with results. They just assumed the results were automatic. The CEO barely spoke to me unless something went wrong. When things went right, he didn't say anything at all. That was fine. I didn't need applause. I needed control. Then his son showed up and started asking why it all looked so complicated. I told him, because it is. He smiled like that was a challenge. And that's the part people never get. They see a system working and think it must be simple. They don't see the hands keeping it upright every week, adjusting, catching, deciding who gets paid and who doesn't get hurt in the process. So ask yourself this, honestly, why do companies underestimate the systems that keep everything running? He showed up on a Tuesday and acted like the place had been waiting for him. Andrew came in with a new badge and a grin that didn't touch his eyes. He shook hands too fast, looked past people while they were still talking. MBA from somewhere expensive. He said it out loud, like it mattered. We're here to modernize. He told the room, Cut friction. Cut waste. I asked him what he thought the waste was. He glanced at my dashboard. This, he said, too many steps. Those steps keep paychecks clean. I said. He smiled again. There are tools that handle that now? I told him. Tools don't handle judgment. He laughed. Soft, like I was being cute. In the next meeting, he talked about savings. $200,000 a year if we streamlined payroll. He said it while the CEO nodded. Nobody asked what happened when payroll failed. Nobody ever does. Andrew pulled me aside later. You've done great work, he said, but we're moving fast. Fast where I asked, forward. He said, with people who can keep up. I watched him say my job out loud without saying my name. By Thursday, he was approving changes I hadn't signed off on. By Friday, he was CC'd on emails that used to come to me first. Power doesn't slam the door. It slides in quietly and locks it from the inside. The CEO stopped asking my opinion. He started asking his son if things were possible. Andrew said yes to everything. That's when I knew this wasn't about improvement. It was about replacement. And not because Andrew understood the system, because he didn't need to. So tell me this. Have you ever seen authority handed to someone who hadn't earned it? They called it a sink. That should have been my first clue. The CEO sat at the head of the table. Andrew to his right. HR on the other side. Already holding a folder like she'd rehearsed this part. Nobody asked how my morning was. We're restructuring, the CEO said. Calm, polite, like weather. Andrew jumped in. We need speed. Fewer dependencies. I looked at him. Payroll is a dependency. HR cleared her throat. This isn't personal, Maribel. I nodded. It never is. The CEO finally looked at me. We don't need your timekeeping and payroll system anymore. There it was. Clean. Final. I waited a beat. Then you don't need me. Andrew smiled like that solved something. We appreciate everything you've done, the CEO said. But Andrew will be taking ownership going forward. Ownership of what I asked? Operations. Andrew said, end to end? I leaned back. Then you need to hear this. Nobody stopped me. So I kept going. Friday is the actual cutoff. I said, if the ACH files aren't encrypted and transmitted to the bank by 4:00 p.m. today, the funds won't clear by Monday morning. You're not just missing a deadline, you're triggering a default. Banks don't do favors, and unions don't do silence. HR shifted. We'll have coverage with what I asked. Andrew said, we've reviewed the workflows. I said, you've reviewed screenshots. The CEO frowned. Are you saying this will fail? I'm saying it won't run. I said, there's a difference. Andrew laughed. Quick and sharp. You're overestimating the risk? I stood up, not angry. Just done. I'm underestimating how much this hurts when it goes wrong. I said, because I've been the one fixing it. The CEO slid the folder toward me. Your last day is Friday. I took it. Then Monday is yours. No one answered that. So tell me when leadership ignores reality. Do you fight or do you walk away? They gave me 4 days to hand over 8 years. HR sent a calendar invite titled Knowledge Transfer. 2 hours, no agenda. Andrew showed up late and sat at my desk like it already belonged to him. Let's keep this high level, he said. We don't need every edge case. I said, every edge case is why this works. He waved it off. We're simplifying. Finance joined on video. Someone asked, can we run payroll faster with the new setup? Andrew answered before I could. Yes, fewer checks, fewer approvals. I leaned in, and fewer breaks. Nobody wrote that down. They wanted passwords, not context. They wanted diagrams, not judgment. Andrew kept saying, we'll automate that. Like automation was a spell you cast. I pulled up the cutoff schedule. Monday morning is non-negotiable. HR said, we understand timelines. You understand calendars. I said, not consequences. Andrew sighed. You're making this sound fragile. It is fragile. I said, that's why it's protected. He showed me his solution. Clean, bright, everything fit on one screen. Time entries fed straight into payroll, no pause, no review layer. Where is the manual reconciliation layer? I asked, pointing at his screen. How does the system flag a gross to net variance? We've automated the overrides. Andrew replied, barely looking up. The algorithm smooths out anomalies over the next pay cycle. It's about flow, Maribel, not friction. People don't pay rent with flow, I said. If the batch contains a single negative net calculation because of a tax coding error, the bank's gateway will reject the entire file. You won't just have one mistake, you'll have 0 deposits. Andrew stared at the screen, his confidence flickering for the first time. The system is designed to balance the data over time, he insisted. Though his voice was thinner, I didn't blink. People don't get paid over time. Andrew, they get paid on Monday, and sample data doesn't call the labor board. Real people do. I stared at him. People don't get paid over time. They get paid on Monday. He smiled again. We tested it with what I asked. Sample data. I closed my eyes for a second. Sample people don't call unions. The COO jumped in. Maribel, we need cooperation. You need understanding. I said, and you don't want it. By Thursday. They stopped asking me questions. They started telling me what they'd already decided. Andrew approved changes I'd warned against. HR asked me to document anything critical, like that was a finite list. I wrote until my fingers hurt. Not because they deserved it, because the people waiting on those paychecks did. Friday afternoon, Andrew clapped his hands. I think we're ready. I looked at the clock. I looked at the cutoff date on my screen. You're not, I said. He didn't respond, just nodded, confident, certain. I packed my desk while Andrew ran meetings in my name. HR stood in the doorway pretending not to watch. She finally said, you don't have to rush. I'm not. I said, I'm done. She handed me a checklist. Badge, laptop, access revoked at end of day, clean, efficient, like they were proud of it. Andrew stopped by around noon. We've got it covered. He said, you can relax. I looked at him. That's what scares me. He laughed. You're still worried I'm always worried. I said, that's why nobody missed a paycheck. He didn't answer, just nodded like we'd agreed on something. A supervisor named Carla caught me by the elevators. This feels wrong, she said quietly. It is. I said, what happens Monday? I hesitated. Either it works or it doesn't. She swallowed. And if it doesn't, I didn't lie. People won't get paid. She didn't say anything after that, just hugged me. Fast, like she wasn't sure if it was allowed. I dropped my badge on the desk outside HR. The security guard avoided eye contact. He knew. Everyone knows when something bad is coming. They just don't want their name on it. Andrew called out as I walked past the conference room. No hard feelings. I stopped. I warned you. He shrugged. We'll be fine. That was the moment I understood. They didn't want sabotage. They wanted silence. They wanted me gone without friction, without noise, without responsibility following them out the door. I walked out anyway. No speech, no email blast, just keys in my hand and the knowledge that I'd done what I could without burning the place down myself. Monday didn't wait for permission. At 8:03, my phone rang. HR, I let it ring once. Before answering, Maribel, she said. Voice tight. We have an issue, I said. Define issue. The payroll file was rejected by the bank. Why, I asked, already knowing. Invalid totals, she said. Some accounts show negative net pay. Others show overtime rates that don't exist. I heard Andrew in the background. Loud, sharp. Tell her to help us fix it. I took the phone off speaker. I don't have access. We can restore it. HR said, just temporarily. That won't fix your data. I said, it'll just make it messier. Andrew grabbed the phone. This shouldn't be happening. It is, I said, because you skipped review. He snapped back. We tested everything. With what I said, silence. Then, we're under pressure here. So are the people who didn't get paid. I said, texts started coming in while he talked. A supervisor saying his crew was standing around. Someone else asking why their pay stub showed 0 hours. One message just said, unions asking questions. HR whispered, what do we tell them? I said, the truth, that payroll didn't run. Andrew cut in. We don't need to involve the union yet. They're already involved. I said, you just don't know it. He lowered his voice. Can you come in? I didn't answer right away. I watched another message pop up. A warehouse worker asking if this meant rent would bounce? No emojis, no anger, just facts. This is exactly what I warned you about. I said, you treated payroll like a button. Andrew exhaled hard. So what now? I looked at the clock. 8:31. The window was already closing. So tell me when pay disappears. Who do people blame first? The first call came from a number I didn't have saved. This is Victor, the voice said, calm. Too calm. I represent the warehouse and transport crews. I figured. I said, he didn't waste time. No one got paid. Work stopped. Andrew tried to take the phone again. This is an internal matter. Victor laughed once. Payroll isn't internal. It's rent. It's food. By 10 o'clock, forklifts were parked. Trucks sat loaded and idle. Supervisors stopped pretending this was a glitch. HR whispered. Can we tell them it'll be fixed today? Victor answered for me. You can tell them whatever you want. They're not clocking in, Andrew snapped. This is escalating too fast. Victor said, it escalated when you missed payroll. Someone from operations joined the call. We're bleeding money every minute. Victor replied, so are our people. The CEO finally spoke. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered. We're working on a solution. Victor said, you had one. Silence followed. The heavy kind. The kind that shifts power without anyone raising their voice. Another message hit my phone. A photo of a locked gate. Someone wrote, news is outside. Andrew swore under his breath. This is turning public. It already is. Victor said, once pay disappears. Secrets don't last. The CEO asked me directly, what do we do? I didn't soften it. You can't outrun this. You can only face it. Victor added. And until you do, nothing moves. By noon, the building was quiet in a way it never had been. Not calm, suspended, like everyone was waiting for someone else to blink first. So tell me at this point, what options does leadership really have left by Tuesday morning? Nobody was pretending anymore. The gates stayed closed. Crews stood outside with crossed arms. Someone taped a handwritten sign to the fence, pay first, work later. A reporter shoved a microphone toward the CEO. How many workers are affected? He said, we're assessing. Victor cut in from behind him. All of them? Andrew tried to pull him aside. You're making this worse. Victor didn't lower his voice. You did that when you skipped payroll. Cameras caught everything. The missed checks. The locked sites. A driver telling a reporter he'd been working 12-hour shifts and now couldn't cover daycare. No music, no slogans, just facts said out loud. HR called me again. Legal wants to know if this is technically a strike. It's not technical. I said, it's real. The CEO finally stopped dancing around it. He called me directly. They're demanding back pay plus penalties. I said, that's how contracts work. We can't afford this, Andrew said in the background. You couldn't afford to miss payroll either. I said, operations chimed in. We're losing $200,000 an hour. Victor answered before I could. Our people lost their whole week. By noon, the governor's office had left a message. By 1, the bank froze outgoing payments. By 2, the board demanded a call. The CEO's voice cracked when he said my name. We need you back. Andrew didn't speak. That was new. I warned you. I said, not angry. Just clear. We'll agree to terms. The CEO said, whatever you need. I watched a clip replay on my phone. A worker saying, we don't want drama. We want our money. That was it. No speeches. No villains. Just pressure closing in from every side. This wasn't about pride anymore. It was about who blinked first and how much damage stayed after. So tell me, could this disaster have been prevented? Or was it inevitable? The CEO called at 6:42 in the morning. I need you back, he said. No buffer, no script, just that. Say it clean. I said, why, our payroll is down. The bank froze transfers. The union won't move. And Andrew, I said, a pause. Then, he's out of operations. Publicly. I said, and permanently? Yes, he said. He'll report to marketing analytics. No sign-off power. Good. I said, next, I come back with authority. Direct line to finance and IT. No middlemen. Done. Here are my terms, I said, my voice flat. First, I need full administrative override access restored before I park my car. Second, we are issuing manual wire transfers immediately base pay, plus a 10% liquidated damages penalty for the breach. Third, Andrew is removed from the payroll server architecture permanently. He loses all right access. Effective now, if you want the trucks moving by noon, I need the signed addendum to my contract waiting in my inbox in 20 minutes. Andrew's voice cracked through the speaker. That's excessive, I said. Missing payroll is excessive. Silence. Then the CEO again. Agreed. I walked back into the building 2 hours later. Victor nodded once. That was enough. HR didn't speak. Finance slid the files over. I rebuilt what they broke. Not fast? Correct. When the bank confirmation came through, the room exhaled like it had been holding its breath for days. Payroll cleared. Accounts funded. Messages stopped sounding desperate and started sounding relieved. The CEO stood there after smaller than before. Thank you, he said. I didn't say you're welcome. I said, next time you think about replacing experience with confidence, remember this week. Andrew didn't look at me. He didn't have to. Power had already moved. Here's what I'll say to anyone watching this play out from the outside. If you hold something critical together, don't let anyone convince you it's invisible. Protect your work. Protect the people it feeds. And if you walk away clean. If this story hit close to home, talk about it. Share it. Say what you would have done. Conversations like this keep the next payroll from breaking before Monday ever comes. By the time the champagne appeared, I was already fired. Not escorted out. Not shouted down. Just quietly removed. As if I'd been a line item someone finally deleted. My name is Dr. Evelyn Hart. I'm 49 years old. A co-founder of this company. And until that morning, I was its chief scientific architect. The meeting was supposed to be routine final prep for our IPO investors, bankers, slides polished within an inch of their lives. Mark Ellison stood at the head of the table, smiling like a man about to ring a bell on Wall Street. He clicked to the next slide, going forward. He said, voice smooth, rehearsed. We need leadership aligned with growth. Evelyn's role no longer fits that direction. There it was. No drama, no discussion. Just a sentence that ended 15 years of work. Before anyone could react, he moved on. The screen filled with a valuation chart bold. Confident numbers climbing upward. At the center of it all, Helix Guard. The AI genomics platform I invented. Helix Guard is the company's core asset. Mark continued. Fully owned, fully integrated. Valued at $1.6 billion. I felt a few heads turn toward me. Some curious, some uncomfortable. No one spoke. And as usual, this story is a work of fiction, created by our editorial team for storytelling purposes. All characters, events, and organizations are fictional. Any resemblance is purely coincidental. Thank you, and let's continue. Mark raised his glass toward the investors lining the far side of the room. Cameras flashed. Someone laughed. I didn't argue. I didn't stand up. I didn't correct him. I simply asked, calmly, almost politely, Mark, have you read clause 21.3 in the licensing agreement? He chuckled. The way people do when they think they've already won. Legals handled it, he said, lifting his champagne higher. Let's celebrate. The room relaxed. The moment passed. My termination was already a footnote. I sat back in my chair, hands folded, watching a man toast himself on a victory he didn't understand. Because if clause 21.3 said what I knew it said, this wasn't a celebration, it was a countdown. And the only question that mattered anymore was this: why would I let him fire me without a fight? Helix Guard wasn't stolen in a dark room by copying files or leaking source code. That would have been obvious, clumsy, illegal in a way everyone understands. What Mark Ellison did was quieter. He stole it with sentences. In the days after my termination, I read the draft IPO prospectus the way scientists read flawed studies slowly, carefully, already knowing something was wrong. Helix Guard appeared everywhere: executive summaries, growth projections, risk disclosures. It was described as exclusive, fully integrated, central to long-term value creation. What it wasn't described as was licensed. The word appeared once, buried, modified by adjectives that softened it into irrelevance: broad, perpetual, unrestricted. Language designed to reassure without being precise. Technically, none of it was false. Practically, it was a lie. Mark had mastered a dangerous skill, saying things that sounded like ownership without ever claiming it outright. Investors reading quickly would walk away believing the company owned Helix Guard outright. Analysts would model it that way. Banks would price it that way. And once the IPO closed, the assumption would harden into reality. I understood the trap immediately. If I spoke up publicly, I wouldn't be seen as correcting a misstatement. I'd be framed as a disgruntled founder, an emotional scientist unable to accept the company had outgrown her. The narrative was already written: brilliant inventor, poor operator, difficult personality. I'd seen it happen before, mostly to women, especially to women who didn't shout. So I stayed silent. Not because I didn't see the theft, but because I understood the cost of interrupting it too early. Every polished paragraph in that prospectus was doing exactly what Mark intended: transferring belief. Once belief moved, leverage followed. And once leverage was gone, no clause, no matter how well written, would matter. Mark wasn't stealing Helix Guard itself. He was stealing the future version of it, the one investors thought they were buying. That was the moment I realized the fight wasn't technical. It was linguistic. And you don't defeat a beautifully written lie by shouting the truth across the room. You defeat it by letting it finish speaking, then introducing consequences it can't explain away. By the end of that night, I closed the document and shut my laptop. The question wasn't whether Mark was lying. It was simpler and far more dangerous. How do you fight a lie that's written well enough to pass for truth? Naomi Chen didn't call. She never did when things mattered. Instead, my phone buzzed once at 11:47 p.m. A single message. No greeting, no punctuation. They're circulating the prospectus without stating Helix Guard as a conditional license. I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. Naomi was the company's head of compliance and research ethics. More importantly, she'd been my colleague back when Helix Guard was still lines of code and half-finished grant proposals. She didn't speculate. She didn't exaggerate. If she messaged at midnight, it meant one thing: the line had already been crossed. I typed back slowly. How bad? 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Bad enough that if the IPO closes, your leverage is gone. That was the sentence that mattered. Once shares were sold, everything changed. Ownership assumptions calcified. Banks defended their underwriting. Investors defended their models. Even if I was legally right, I'd be fighting not a company, but an ecosystem invested in pretending the misunderstanding was permanent. Another message came in. Mark's team is using exclusive exploitation rights language. It reads like ownership if you don't know what to look for. I did know what to look for. Clause 21.3 wasn't designed to stop theft in advance. It was designed to respond to misrepresentation specifically. Any attempt to present Helix Guard as owned rather than licensed, but timing mattered. Trigger it too early, and it would look reactive, emotional, vindictive. Trigger it too late, and it would be meaningless. I asked the question I already knew the answer to. Can I contact the banks or the partners? Her reply came almost instantly. No. One word. No explanation. If you speak to them directly, it becomes interference. Let them finish writing their version. We'll use the paper trail. That was Naomi always playing the long game. Not protecting me. Protecting the process. I set my phone down and looked out at the dark street below my apartment. 15 years of work reduced to phrasing choices made by people who had never written a single line of Helix Guard's code. Mark believed silence meant weakness. What he didn't understand was that silence can also be positioning. Naomi sent one final message before signing off. You did everything right by not reacting in the room. Now let them prove what they're willing to misrepresent. I locked the screen. If I stayed silent, This wouldn't just cost me, it would cost every investor who believed the story as written, and every patient whose data would end up in places the license was designed to prevent. The question wasn't whether I could stop this. It was sharper than that. If I stayed silent now, who would end up paying for it later? Clause 21.3 was never meant to flip switches or crash servers. That was the misconception everyone made, including Mark. Helix Guard kept running. Hospitals kept analyzing data. Research partners kept logging in as usual. From the outside, nothing appeared broken. What changed happened upstream, quietly. At 8:15 the next morning, my attorney filed a narrowly scoped notice, a temporary suspension of Helix Guard's license, triggered by material misrepresentation in public-facing disclosures. No accusations, no press, just documentation. The filing cited a single issue. The prospectus described Helix Guard in a manner inconsistent with its licensing terms specifically, implying ownership where none existed. That was enough. By 10:30, the lead underwriting bank requested clarification from Mark's team. By noon, the second bank followed, not because they suspected wrongdoing, but because uncertainty is poison to capital. Banks don't need drama, they need certainty. And Helix Guard was suddenly uncertain. At 1:45, Naomi forwarded me an internal note marked urgent. The language was clinical, almost polite. All intellectual property claims must be verified prior to proceeding. By mid-afternoon, the IPO roadshow was paused pending review. That was the phrase they used. Paused, not canceled, not failed. Just waiting. I knew what it meant. No bank would price a company when its core $1.6 billion valuation asset was under review. No insurer would underwrite risk tied to ambiguous ownership. No institutional investor would sign off without airtight clarity. Money doesn't move on confidence. It moves on paperwork. Mark tried to respond quickly. I could see it in the flurry of revised drafts. The late-night emails, the subtle edits meant to walk statements back without admitting error. Too late. The moment Helix Guard status became a question instead of an assumption, the deal lost momentum, and momentum is everything. That evening, I received a short update from Naomi. They're asking for a full IP audit. Another line followed. Mark didn't expect this part. I sat at my desk, hands resting on a document I'd written years earlier, one no one had bothered to reread until now. Clause 21.3 didn't punish anyone. It didn't accuse. It simply forced the company to stop pretending. And once the money stopped moving, so did the power. Which raised the only question left unanswered: when the cash flow freezes, what authority does anyone really have? Mark Ellison didn't cancel the celebration. That alone told me how deeply he misunderstood what was happening. The venue overlooked the harbor. All glass and soft lighting, an investor-friendly view designed to suggest inevitability. Success is a foregone conclusion. The invitations had gone out weeks earlier. Embossed and confident, promising a toast to the company's future. Canceling would have looked like doubt. So the party went on. I arrived 10 minutes late. Deliberately. Not early enough to be questioned. Not late enough to be noticed as an absence. The hostess checked my name twice before nodding. Her smile stiff. Dr. Hart. Former co-founder, she said, reading carefully. Former. The word followed me into the room. Mark was already holding court near the center. Champagne flute in hand. Laughing a little too loudly. He looked relaxed performatively, so like a man determined to act his way through a problem. I didn't approach him. I didn't need to. The moment I stepped into view, conversations slowed. A few people recognized me immediately. Others took their cues from the sudden shifts in posture, the subtle recalibration that happens when a room senses tension but doesn't yet know why. I took a glass from a passing tray, didn't drink. Mark eventually noticed. His smile tightened for half a second before he crossed the room. Evelyn, he said pleasantly, didn't expect to see you. I know, I replied. He gestured around us. Big night. For optics. I said, yes. His laugh landed wrong. A few heads turned. Someone nearby raised their glass. waiting for a toast that didn't come. I leaned in just enough that Mark had to listen. Helix Guard's license is suspended, I said quietly. Just one sentence. No explanation, no accusation. The effect was immediate. Mark's hand froze mid-gesture. Across the room, I watched 3 investors glance down at their phones almost in unison. Someone set their glass down without drinking. "You're mistaken," Mark said. "Too quickly." "No," I replied. "Your underwriters aren't?" Silence spread in a way sound never could. Conversations died mid-sentence. No one clinked glasses. The champagne stayed untouched. Mark tried to recover. He smiled. He said something about temporary reviews and procedural noise. No one laughed. Because in rooms like this, confidence comes from liquidity. And liquidity had just left. I set my glass down on a passing tray. The party continued, technically, but no one celebrated, which left only one question hanging in the air. Heavier than the music, how could a single sentence shut down an entire room? Mark Ellison didn't sit back and wait for the inevitable. He understood that if he couldn't delete Clause 21.3, he had to delete the person holding the pen. By Monday morning, my system credentials were dead. Not just my email, but my access to the very research servers I had built from the ground up. When I tried to call Naomi, the call failed instantly. Mark had severed my internal communications under the guise of data security during a transition period. But that was just the opening act. By noon, the tech headlines began to scream scientific fraud allegations at Helix Guard founder Dr. Evelyn Hart under internal investigation. Mark had leaked a dossier, a meticulously fabricated collection of evidence, accusing me of manipulating clinical trial results 3 years ago to secure funding. He didn't need to prove I was guilty. He only needed to make me toxic in the eyes of the market. If she's a fraud, Mark told a crowd of reporters at a hastily called press briefing. Then every clause she wrote in the past, including this so-called Clause 21.3, is part of an elaborate extortion scheme. It was a scorched earth strategy, incinerate my reputation to save the sinking IPO. I sat in my apartment, watching the headlines flicker across my screen. Mark had crossed the line from a contract dispute to character assassination. He believed that once a woman is branded a fraud, her voice becomes ash. But Mark forgot one fundamental rule of genomics. Data doesn't lie, and it always leaves a trail. Naomi's call came through an encrypted app we'd set up back in our startup days. Her voice was taut, underscored by the frantic rhythm of typing. "Evelyn, he's trying to force my hand. He wants me to sign an affidavit confirming the fraud allegations against you. He's offering me the COO seat if I testify." "What did you do?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I did the one thing Mark Ellison hates most," Naomi replied, a hint of triumph in her voice. I went looking for the metadata. Naomi sent over a compressed file. It wasn't full of scientific reports. It was the server logs from the legal department's private drive. Mark had made a fatal error fueled by arrogance. To create the forged dossier, he had ordered a technician to retroactively edit old files. But every modification within the Helix Guard ecosystem was logged by the security protocol I had written. Myself, it stored the digital fingerprint of the person who authorized the change. He signed the order to modify those files at 2:00 a.m., the night you were fired. Naomi said, "Evelyn, we don't just have Clause 21.3 anymore. We have evidence of securities fraud and evidence tampering. This isn't an internal matter. It's a felony." I took a slow, steady breath. Mark thought he could use the media to bury the truth. He thought that by attacking my character, Clause 21.3 would simply evaporate, but Clause 21.3 didn't exist because people liked me. It existed because of the cold, hard logic of the law. Hard. I forwarded Naomi's files to my attorneys and the lead underwriting banks. This time, my message was clinical. If you proceed with an IPO led by a CEO masterminding the forgery of scientific records, you won't just lose money. You will lose your licenses to practice. Permanently. That night, I looked out the window. Mark was hosting a lavish dinner for the bankers to reassure them. He was still smiling, still raising his glass. He had no idea that behind the scenes, $1, $6 billion was already melting into zeros. The question was no longer whether I'd keep my name on the building. The question was would Mark choose to face me in the boardroom or the prosecutor in a courtroom? She never did. The emergency board meeting stretched past 2 hours, but the moment that mattered lasted less than 5 minutes. I wasn't in the room, but I didn't need to be. Naomi later described it to me with the same precision she brought to every compliance review. Mark had just finished speaking. He'd repeated the same argument he'd been using all week, that the IPO delay was temporary, that the licensing issue was procedural, that the company had been damaged by overreaction. Then Naomi asked for the floor. She didn't accuse him. She didn't editorialize. She opened her laptop. "I'd like to clarify one point," she said calmly. "Specifically, how Helix Guard's license was described in investor-facing documents." The first email appeared on the screen. Mark's words. Mark's timestamp. Adjust the language so it doesn't slow momentum. Emphasize control, not conditions. A pause. Then another email. Then another. Each one requesting edits that softened the distinction between licensed and owned. Each one flagged by legal or compliance. Each one overridden. The room went quiet. Naomi didn't stop. She displayed the insurance data sharing agreement next. The clause it violated, the internal warning memo that had gone unanswered. "I raised concerns," she said evenly. Multiple times. These risks were documented. They were not disclosed. Someone on the board asked Mark if he wanted to respond. For the first time since I'd known him, Mark Ellison didn't speak. He looked down at the table, then at the screen, then nowhere at all. Silence settled, not the awkward kind, but the decisive kind. The kind that means everyone understands the same thing at once. An independent counsel was brought in before the meeting ended. Their recommendation was blunt suspend Mark's authority immediately to limit legal exposure. Naomi closed her laptop. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't chosen sides. She'd simply placed the truth where no one could look away from it. Later that night, she sent me a short message. "I didn't do this for you. I did it because pretending this was acceptable would make us complicit." That was Naomi. And that was the moment Mark lost the room, not to anger, not to revenge, but to silence backed by evidence, which left only one question hanging in the air when someone stopped speaking entirely. Are they conceding or hiding? Not from Mark, not from legal, from the board chair. His voice was calm. Careful, every word chosen the way people choose language when they already know the outcome. "Dr. Hart," he said, "we need to resolve this." He didn't apologize. He didn't justify. He moved straight to the question everyone else had been circling. "What do you want to end this?" I leaned back against the kitchen counter, phone pressed to my ear, and watched the city lights blink on and off below my window. "I don't want money," I said. There was a pause. A recalibration. "I don't want a title either." Another pause. Longer this time. "What I want." I continued. "Is control of Helix Guard's license and full transparency in every public disclosure tied to it?" Silence. Then a quiet exhale. "That's not unreasonable," he said, which told me everything I needed to know. He explained the board's position. The company was exposed. Partners were nervous. Regulators were watching. They needed the asset stabilized and quickly. They needed me. "Would you consider returning?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. "I'm not coming back to rescue reputations," I said finally. "I'd return to protect the technology and the people whose data it touches." "I understand." He said, "We can structure it that way." We agreed to speak again in the morning. Terms in writing. No shortcuts. When the call ended, I set the phone down and stood there for a long moment. 3 months earlier, I'd been erased from a slide. Now they were asking me how to fix what they'd broken. The question wasn't whether I had leverage. That part was settled. The real question was simpler and heavier. Was I returning to save the company or to make sure Helix Guard survived it? No press conference. No apology tour. Just a regulatory filing and an internal notice citing material disclosure, failures, and conflicts of interest. The kind of language that sounds restrained until you understand what it protects the company from admitting. The IPO was suspended indefinitely, not postponed, not rescheduled, suspended until governance could be rebuilt from the ground up. The board issued a second statement clarifying HelixGuard's status. For the first time in months, the language was precise, repetitive, unambiguous. HelixGuard was a licensed technology, conditionally granted, subject to revocation. Banks updated their models. Partners paused negotiations. The market adjusted its expectations downward and then steadied. The company didn't collapse. It stopped pretending. I returned a week later, not to applause or headlines, but through a side entrance, carrying a single signed document. My role was narrowly defined and carefully written full control over HelixGuard's licensing, compliance disclosures, and downstream use. No authority beyond that. No ambiguity within it. Naomi remained in her position. No promotion. No spotlight. Just formal protection from retaliation and a quiet acknowledgement from the board that her record had likely prevented criminal exposure. She stopped by my office that evening, leaning against the doorframe the way she always had. "You okay?" she asked. "I am now," I said. HelixGuard's license was reinstated under stricter terms. No insurance data sharing, no secondary monetization, mandatory audits. Several partners walked away. That was acceptable. The ones who stayed understood responsibility. I didn't celebrate. There was no champagne, no victory speech, just long days, careful disclosures, and difficult conversations with people who had confused confidence for ownership. One morning, I stood by the window as the sun rose over the Pacific, quiet, indifferent, unchanged. Mark had believed firing me would end the problem. He believed authority came from speaking the loudest in the room. But Clause 21.3 had never been about revenge. It was a boundary, a reminder that technology doesn't belong to the person who markets it best, but to the person willing to be accountable for it, especially when doing so costs them power. That morning, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clear. And clarity, I've learned, is the hardest thing to take away once it's earned. If this story made you stop and think, hit like to support. Subscribe for more stories like this and leave a comment with your perspective. We read everyone. The sentence didn't sound real when it landed. It sounded borrowed, like something said in movies. Not fluorescent rooms with bad coffee and people who still had their lunch receipts folded in their pockets. "You're under investigation." My manager said it slowly, calm, almost gentle, like he was giving me weather updates instead of pulling the floor out from under me. For a second, nobody moved, not even me. I felt this weird stillness in my chest, like my body had paused to make sure it heard him right. Then the air changed. Chairs shifted. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else leaned back just enough to not be next to me anymore. That's how fast it happened. I'd been at the firm a year. No warnings, no write-ups, no reputation for drama. I came in early, left on time, kept my head down. I wasn't the person you circled in meetings or whispered about in the hallway. I was the safe kind of invisible. And as usual, this story is a work of fiction, created by our editorial team for storytelling purposes. All characters, events, and organizations are fictional. Any resemblance is purely coincidental. Thank you, and let's continue. My name is Karen Holt. I am 42 years old. The meeting wasn't even supposed to be about me. It was a routine compliance review, a checklist meeting. We had done a dozen just like it. I remember thinking stupidly about how cold the room felt, how the table smelled faintly like disinfectant and burnt coffee. My manager didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. That was the part that scared me. He looked prepared. "We have concerns," he said, glancing down at a folder he hadn't opened yet. "And based on those concerns, you're under investigation." He didn't say what for. Not yet. I felt eyes on me without anyone actually looking. People suddenly needed their notes, their phones, the wall, anything but my face. Someone I'd had lunch with the week before slid their chair back an inch, maybe two. I kept my hands folded on the table. I don't know why. Instinct, maybe, or pride, or the dumb belief that if I stayed still enough, this would slow down. My manager kept talking, Words like internal and process and review, they floated past me without sticking. What stuck was the silence from everyone else. No questions, no confusion, just acceptance. That was the moment I understood something I hadn't wanted to before. Whatever was coming next, I was going to be on my own. I took a breath I hoped looked steady. The folder slid closer to me, stopping just short of my hands. I didn't touch it. I didn't say anything. I just sat there, feeling the room quietly rearrange itself so I was no longer part of it. And that was how it started. Nobody said my name. That was the part that hurt more than the accusation. My manager kept talking. But the room had already decided I was background noise. Chairs scraped the floor, soft but deliberate. Not dramatic. Just enough space so nobody could say they were sitting next to me. I think we should continue. My manager said, "This isn't a group discussion." That shut the door on anyone who might have spoken up. Diane, 2 seats down, looked at me. Just for a second. Her mouth opened like she might say something. I'd covered for her last quarter when she missed a deadline. She knew that. We both did. She closed her mouth, looked at her notes. I felt that choice land heavier than anything my manager had said. "This is standard procedure." He continued. "We'll keep this contained." Contained meant quiet. Contained meant me. Someone across the table asked, "Should we still review the numbers?" He nodded. "Yes, let's stay on agenda." Just like that, the meeting moved on. Forecasts, timelines, action items. My name disappeared from the room like it had never belonged there. I sat there while people talked around me, over me. I could feel the heat in my face, but I didn't move. Didn't interrupt, didn't defend myself. Every instinct said speak now or lose everything. But another voice told me to wait. I hated that voice. I trusted it anyway. At one point, Mark leaned toward me. He didn't whisper. He didn't look at me. "I'm sorry." He said, quiet, flat, like an apology you say to a cashier when the card reader breaks. "That's okay." I said, "It wasn't, but that was the only thing that fit." When the meeting finally ended, people stood up fast. Too fast. Papers gathered. Chairs pushed back hard now. Like urgency could erase what just happened. No one walked out with me. I stayed seated for a second longer than necessary. Hands still folded, watching the space around my chair remain empty even after the room cleared. He waited until the door closed before speaking again. "This doesn't have to get messy," my manager said. His voice dropped. Softer now. Private. Like he was doing me a favor. He pulled a document from the folder and slid it across the table. It stopped just short of my hands. He didn't push it all the way. That felt intentional. "This is an acknowledgement." He said, "Improper conduct, nothing criminal. Just a policy violation." "What conduct?" I said. He smiled. "Small and tight. We don't need to litigate details." HR sat to his right, hands folded, eyes fixed on the table. She hadn't said a word since the meeting ended. Her silence felt practiced. "If you sign," he continued, "we escort you out today. 2 weeks severance. Neutral reference. This stays internal. And if I don't," I said. He exhaled through his nose, like he'd expected that question but hoped I wouldn't ask it. "Then we expand the review." He said, "Email access, system logs, interviews." He let the list hang there. "That process can take months." HR finally spoke. "It can be stressful." She said, "People talk." I looked at the paper. My name was already typed at the bottom. Clean. Correct. Like I'd agreed before I walked in. "You're asking me to admit something you haven't explained." I said, "We're asking you to help the company resolve this efficiently." My manager said, "Sometimes that means making hard choices. Protect the company." He didn't say protect me. That part was implied and fragile. I thought about my rent, my health insurance, the way people had already moved their chairs away from me like fear was contagious. Signing would make this stop. Fast. Quiet. My manager leaned back. "I'd hate for this to affect your future." That was the threat. Polite. Controlled. Wrapped in concern. I didn't touch the paper. I folded my hands instead. Same as before. My pulse was loud in my ears, but my voice didn't shake. "I need a minute." I said. He nodded. Like granting permission was still his move. The document stayed where it was. waiting for me to decide how much of myself I was willing to give up to make the room comfortable again. They stepped out to give me a minute. That's what my manager called it. Like, this was generous. The door clicked shut. I stayed seated. Same chair, same posture. I didn't trust myself to stand yet. I kept thinking about how this didn't start today. That was the lie everyone in that room was telling themselves. This had been building for months, and I'd felt it in small, irritating ways I kept brushing off because noticing them made my life harder. Invoices that didn't quite line up. Charges that moved between accounts late at night. Always small, always just under whatever threshold triggered a review. A vendor payment reversed and reapplied with a different description. Like someone changed their mind, but forgot to clean up after. I'd flagged one once. Casually. Probably a system lag, my manager said back then. Smiling. Good catch. Though, I remember feeling relieved. I wanted it to be boring. I wanted to be wrong. Another time, I asked why an internal audit summary skipped an entire week of activity. He said, that data set was corrupted. No follow-up, no fix. Just a shrug that dared me to keep pushing. I didn't. Not right away. The truth is, I needed this job. I needed the health insurance. I needed the routine. And after what happened before, I promised myself I wouldn't be the person who blew everything up again just to prove a point. That was my stupid decision. I see it now. Still, I kept copies. Nothing dramatic, just screenshots. Notes saved where they didn't belong. I told myself it was habit, professional curiosity, nothing else. When my phone buzzed in my pocket, I flinched. A text from my sister. You okay? I didn't answer. I looked at the paper on the table again. My name at the bottom. All it needed was a signature, and this version of the story would be sealed. No investigation, no rumors, no months of being watched like I was already guilty. My manager knocked once and came back in without waiting. Have you thought it over? He asked. I nodded. Slowly. I have, I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I could still feel doubt crawling around in my chest, telling me I might be wrong, that I might be about to lose everything for nothing. But I'd already lost something by staying quiet, and I wasn't willing to lose more just to make this easier for them. I didn't reach for the paper. I'm not signing that, I said. My manager's smile didn't disappear, but it thinned. Karen, let's not make this harder than it has to be. I nodded, like I was agreeing. Then I reached into my pocket. He caught it immediately. Don't, he said. Sharper now. The word landed like a hand on my chest. I pulled my phone out anyway and set it on the table. Not dramatic, just there. The screen lit up. Clean and bright against everything beige. HR shifted. Karen, this isn't appropriate during a review. I'm not calling about the review. I said, that was true. It just wasn't complete. My manager stood. His chair scraped once, put the phone away. I kept my eyes on the table. I unlocked the screen and scrolled once. Slow. I wanted them to see the pace. This wasn't panic. This was intentional. This is escalating. He said, you're forcing an issue. I think the issue was already forced. I said, the room tilted. Not physically, socially. He glanced at HR like she might anchor him. She didn't. She stared at her hands. Thumbs pressed together so hard they went pale. Karen, he said, lowering his voice, trying to shrink the moment. If you make this call, you can't undo it. My stomach dropped. Cold, sudden, the kind of feeling that tells you something is gone before you've let it go. I know, I said. I tapped the screen. The dialing tone cut through the room. Thin and exposed, everyone stopped moving. Even him. End the call. He said, I didn't. The phone rang once. Twice. My pulse was loud in my ears, but my hand didn't shake. If this failed, it failed publicly. I could live with that. When the line connected, I lifted the phone to my ear. Yes, I said. This is Karen Holt. His face changed before anyone on the other end spoke. Yes, I said. This is Karen Holt. I didn't say where I was. I didn't say why I was calling. I let the name sit there. Bare and deliberate. My manager stepped closer. Who are you calling? He asked. I kept my eyes on the far wall. Like looking at him would make this wobble. I need to report a situation. I said into the phone. It just escalated. HR stood up. Karen, stop. You're misunderstanding the process. I'm describing it. I said, "That's different." My manager reached for the table. Palm flat, end the call. Right now. I lowered the phone just enough so he could hear the other voice breathe on the line. Not words, just presence. That was enough. He froze. Say it again. He said, "Who are you talking to?" I didn't answer him. I answered the call. "They're asking me to sign an acknowledgement." I said, "No specifics. No evidence. Public accusation." HR shook her head. "Sharps, that's not accurate." "Then correct me." I said, still into the phone. "On record." My manager's voice cracked. "Just a hair. You're making a serious mistake. I already made smaller ones." I said, "I'm done with those." He lunged for the phone. Not fast, not violent. Desperate. I turned my shoulder. "Just enough. Don't," he said. Not commanding now, pleading. I listened to the voice on the other end say my name again. Clear. Certain. Like this wasn't a gamble to them at all. I brought the phone back to my ear. "I'm still here," I said. And for the first time since this started, he wasn't the one deciding what happened next. It happened fast enough that nobody reacted cleanly. My manager moved around the table. One hand out, palm open like he was calming an animal. "Give me the phone," he said. Not loud, tight, like this was slipping and he could feel it. "No," I said. That was all. He grabbed it anyway. Not violently. Not yet. Just fingers closing over mine. Pulling. The phone slipped from my grip and landed in his hand. Screen still lit. The call still live. HR gasped. Actually gasped. "You can't do that," she said. Standing now, voice thin. "I absolutely can." He snapped. "This is company property." "It's not," I said. He ignored me and brought the phone to his ear. "This is Ryan Miller." He said, "There's been a misunderstanding." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I let him talk himself into a corner. On the other end, the voice asked for me. Calm, patient. He hesitated. That pause mattered. "Who is this?" he demanded. HR backed toward the door. I saw her hand shake when she reached for her badge. "I'm calling security," she said. "Already dialing." "Good," he said. "Call them." 2 guards appeared seconds later. I knew one of them, Kevin. We'd ridden the elevator together a dozen times. He looked at me, then at my manager. "What's going on?" Kevin asked. "She's refusing to comply." My manager said, "She's disrupting an internal process." Kevin's eyes flicked to me again. I said nothing. Silence was safer than explaining. Explaining always gave people something to twist. The voice on the phone said my name again, louder this time. My manager's jaw clenched. He lowered the phone, covered the speaker. "You have no idea what you're doing." He said to me, "You're about to ruin your career." I finally met his eyes. "You already tried that." Security shifted. Kevin cleared his throat. "Sir?" He said, "Maybe step back." That was it. The crack. My manager looked around the room like he was seeing it for the first time. HR pale. Security unsure. Me unmoving. He handed the phone back. Hard. It hit my palm and stung. I raised it to my ear. "I'm here," I said. The room was quiet now. Not respectful. Not calm. Just waiting. They didn't burst in. No shouting. No drama. The door opened and 2 people stepped inside like they belonged there. 1 man, 1 woman. Plain clothes, calm faces. Badges came out only after the room noticed them. "Who's in charge here?" the woman asked. My manager straightened like the question was meant for him. "I am. This is an internal matter." She looked at him, then at me. "Karen Holt." "Yes," I said. "Step away from the table." She said, "Not unkind, not optional." HR tried to speak. "We were just..." The man cut in. "We'll take it from here." That was it. Authority moved rooms without asking permission. My manager laughed once. Too loud. "This is ridiculous." She's a compliance analyst. Mid-level. 1 year in. "Authorized liaison," the woman said. Checking her notes. Embedded. Full access. "Reporting protocol established months ago." The words landed wrong for him. You could see it. He kept waiting for someone to object. No one did. "This company has been under federal review." The man added, "You were notified." My manager shook his head. Not like this. Like this is what happens when people interfere? The woman said. She turned to me. Are you okay? I thought about lying. Saying I was fine. Saying it hadn't rattled me. I'm here. I said. That felt honest enough. Security backed away. HR sat down hard. Like her legs finally gave out. My manager's voice dropped. You set me up. No, I said. You ignored warnings. That's your opinion. That's documented, the man said. The folder on the table finally opened. Not by my manager. By someone else. They asked him to step aside. He didn't at first, then he did. Slower than before. Smaller. I watched him realize something I'd known for a while now. The rules only protect you as long as you're the one enforcing them. When they asked me to walk with them, I stood. My chair scraped back. Loud in the quiet room. No one stopped me. They moved us to a smaller room. No table. Just chairs in a loose circle. Like they were trying not to make this feel like an interrogation. The woman asked me to explain it. Start where it made sense to you. It didn't. I said, that was the point. I talked about timing. Charges posted after hours. Reversals that left a few dollars behind. Transfers that looked clean unless you followed them twice. Always small amounts. $20 here, $50 there. Never enough to trigger alarms on their own. The man nodded. Scale matters. It always does. I said, over a year, it turns into hundreds of thousands of dollars. Spread thin, quiet. He asked who knew. Ryan knew. I said. Saying my manager's name out loud felt strange now. Smaller? 2 people in finance, 1 in operations. They never talked in the same room. And everyone else. The woman said. They saw pieces. I said. Not patterns. That was intentional. She wrote that down. They trained people to answer questions without answering them. I said. Most of my coworkers thought they were protecting clients. Or the company. Or their jobs. Did anyone suspect? The man asked. Yes, I said. They just stopped short of proving it. I thought of Diane. Mark. The way their chairs slid away from me. They weren't evil, I said. They were tired. The woman closed her notebook. You could have walked away. I almost did. I said, more than once. Ryan's voice carried from the hallway. Raised now, angry. Someone told him to lower it. He didn't. The man looked at me. This isn't about revenge, I know, I said. That's why it took so long. They stood to leave. I stayed seated. My hands were shaking now. I let them. They didn't arrest anyone that day. That part surprised people. Investigations don't work like movies. They suspend. They separate. They wait. Ryan was escorted out first. Not in cuffs. Just quiet. His badge clipped off by someone who wouldn't meet his eyes. HR followed. Pale and nodding too much. Security wrote names down. I stayed. A woman from finance hovered near the door. Lila. We'd shared snacks. Complained about spreadsheets. She cleared her throat. I should have said something. She said, not loud, not dramatic. I know. I said, I meant it. She nodded like she'd expected anger and didn't know what to do without it. They told us it was normal. She said, the adjustments, the reversals. That's how it works. I said, you only see what you're allowed to. She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. I'm sorry, so am I. I said, for different reasons. Weeks later, the email went out. External review, ongoing inquiry. Certain individuals placed on leave, no names, no victory lap. Just a quiet acknowledgement that something had been wrong enough to stop pretending. They found numbers. Over 3 years, more than $200,000 shifted where it shouldn't have gone. Enough to matter. Not enough to scream. I packed my desk after that. No speeches, no send-off. I left my badge on the monitor stand and walked out alone. Here's what I learned. And I'm saying it plain. If something feels off and you keep shrinking to fit it, that cost doesn't disappear. It just transfers to you. Don't carry what isn't yours. If this story hit close to home, talk about it. Share it. Stay louder than the systems that count on your silence. I stepped outside. The door closed behind me. I didn't look back.